And welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Dr. Linda Henman. She is the Decision Catalyst. She's the founder of Henman Performance Group, which is a leadership consulting firm based in St. Louis. Linda helps C-suite leaders make decisions that they must get right and can't afford to get wrong. She has written several books. She is a member of the $1 Million Consulting Hall of Fame. She's been involved in some amazing decision-making studies while she was working on her PhD and conducted long-term original research on 138 American POWs, including the late John McCain, who had survived 5 or more years of brutal imprisonment. So we've got a little bit of academic, a lot of author, a lot of consultant. You fit right in, Linda. So welcome aboard today.
Thank you, Peter. It's good to be here.
Great. So let's dive in a little bit. Let's just talk about the right mix for you, because you've been doing this a long time and you've got an interesting mix of research, consulting, authorship, et cetera. So maybe tell us a little bit how you found the right balancing act, if you will.
Well, the short answer is accidentally. That when I was coming out of college, I started teaching when I was 20 years old. When I graduated, I was 21, and getting my first job. And my dream then was to be a high school speech and English teacher. That's all I wanted to do: coach speakers and teach grammar and composition. And I thought that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so that's what I prepared for, and that was what I was ready to do. Peter, at this stage of my game, if you told me I had to be a high school speech and English teacher, I think I would say, just shoot me. I can't imagine that that's what I would want to do now. But one of the problems is when we're in our 20s, we don't think about what we're going to want to do in our 40s or any time after that. We think about what we're going to want to do when we're 23 or 24, a couple of years out. So what worked for me, and I didn't know it then, but looking back in hindsight, of course, is 2020, is that I've always had intellectual curiosity. I've always wanted to know more about just about any subject.
But let me ask you on that, because so many of the people I work with, I would actually put myself in that category, have that intellectual curiosity, which at first blush seems like a gift, but it could also be a curse if you don't have the discipline and structure around it, because to be overly curious about too many things doesn't necessarily pay the bills. So how have you managed that?
Well, I concentrate efforts. So, for example, I remain open to learning just about everything. I'm going to Croatia next week for the first time. I know nothing about Croatia. I've never been there. So I'm very curious to learn what there is, but that's not why I'm going. I'm going for a meeting with Alan Weiss's group, the invitation only group, and I'm going to learn more about how to make my business better. So it's a question of prioritizing. That the number one thing I need to concentrate on next week is really two things: building my business and getting more customers myself, but also reframing what I'm doing. I am now going in a little bit different direction than I've gone before, and that is talking about mindset a whole lot more. So I'm reading about mindset. I am talking to other people who are involved in mindset. And this is going to be the topic of my next book. So that's my focus right now. But I also put myself in situations where I'm going to be with consultants from all over the world. So I want to know what's going on in Australia. I want to know what's going on in Europe. That's the curiosity I'm talking
So,
about.
so let's talk about that transition, though, because tell us a little bit about your current body of work and how that transition to focusing more on mindset is a radical shift or a minor pivot.
Well, probably somewhere in between. I sound like a politician, don't I? That I got my PhD in organizational psychology.
Right.
So I've always been interested in mindset. I just didn't think about it that way, or why I called it why people do what they're doing. And with the discussion of mindset coming out and thinking more about what's holding my customers back, like with my clients, when I think you have the talent, you're smart enough, you have the experience, but something is standing in your way. And as when I do executive coaching, my job is to go in and remove those barriers. And more, it became obvious to me that the barrier was of their own making. The barrier was between their two ears. They did not have an abundance mindset. They had a poverty mindset, that they were always scared that they wouldn't have
So
enough.
scarcity
And
versus abundance as the underlying. Yeah.
absolutely, scarcity versus abundance.
But I want to frame this in the context of a lot of your work is on, decision making and all those things. So it seems to me that the mindset piece is not, a total departure from the core, but an evolution, if you will, and because you're not throwing away sort of the baby with the bathwater in your pre-existing work. Is it fair to say you're sort of layering the mindset lens on top of this? I'm just trying to understand sort of how it's unfolding for you.
I think you're absolutely onto it, Peter, that my work has always been about decision making. For a long time, it was helping clients make talent decisions. So when I worked for a firm here in St. Louis about 15 years ago, I concentrated on pre-employment decisions of telling my clients, you should hire this people, you shouldn't hire those people, and succession planning.
Okay.
And so those were the kinds of decisions that I was working on. And then I still kept doing that, but started working with clients more on strategy work. What do you want to do at this company? Which direction you want to go? Not how do you want to do it, but which direction do you want to go with? And that led us into business development
Okay.
decisions. How do you want to join this? And then when I took a step back, and by the way, these professional development classes that I go to with Alan Weiss and the other consultants who help me out, is that they force you to step back and say, okay, what's the theme? What's going on? What is your thought leadership? And I said, it's about helping people understand how to make decisions, not just giving advice on specific kinds of decision. So that if you picture looking at a kaleidoscope and adjusting it one way, you see a beautiful picture. If you adjust it another way, you see a beautiful picture. I've added another beautiful picture to my kaleidoscope.
Got it. So yeah, it seems to me an almost natural progression in the discipline of decision making. So you've got decision making, you moved from sort of employment to business development, and now we're laying on sort of this growth mindset to look through that as one of the lenses to see how it impacts an individual, a team, or an organization's decision making. And then if we don't like how it's impacting it, how do we adjust it, change it, modify it to get to a better outcome? So I love that.
That's absolutely right.
Cool. So I want to talk for a little bit about your experience as an author. So you've written several books, you've got another one in the pipeline. Give us a high level overview of more the business side of how, I mean, it's sort of a little ironic asking the decision woman how she makes decisions, but I think it's good. How have you been making the decisions around the next book relative to the previous books?
Well, that's a very funny answer on this part, Peter, that I usually know what the next book is when I write the last chapter of the book I'm working
Ah,
on. So years ago, I put off, I was writing Landing in the Executive Chair, and I put off writing the team building chapter because I just didn't get excited about it, couldn't figure out what I wanted. And then I got my inspiration from watching, I think it was HBO or Netflix or something, that I was watching about Apollo 13 and the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And it clicked. I want to write about what these groups of people have to do in high stakes decision making. And so that prompted me to write Challenge the Ordinary. When the stakes are high, how do you make the decision? And then that led on to Tough Calls, how to move on beyond indecision. And then what's the highest stakes kind of decision that many leaders make? And that's mergers and acquisitions.
yep.
So that led to the latest book that came out in November, which is The Merger Mindset. And the last part of that book was describing exactly what we mean by mindset. Not just here's what you do, but what does your mindset look like? Because we drew a picture of it, my co-author Constance Derricks and I did. And that then she and I just had this conversation last week, as a matter of fact, said we need to we need to write a more general book about mindset that's not just for business leaders, that's for everybody, of what has to happen between your two ears for you to develop this sort of abundance, growth, success, excellent. We haven't decided on the title yet,
Sure.
but these are all ways we're talking about that mindset that we're going to describe in the next book.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So tell me for a bit where I was sort of going towards is, so you've got the seed of an idea, you nurture it, and you decide I'm going to turn it into a book, right?
Right.
What I was looking at is if someone else out there listening, and I'm sure there are several, are in that place where they're sort of pondering how to best get the book out into the universe. What are the, there's a lot of decisions they have to make. Do I self-publish? Do I go to a big house? Do I author it by myself? Do I get a ghostwriter? Whatever. Give us a quick overview on how you've made those decisions, and where you might make them differently in the future.
The first question to ask is, why do you want to do this book? Whenever you change your strategy or your direction, you need to ask why you're doing it. And the decision for me of why I wanted to do it was to grow my business. So I did not go into writing books for the purpose of writing. I mean, initially I did, but then I realized I'm not going to write a Harry Potter series. I need to write books that are going to bring me business, because I make far more in one consulting engagement than I ever would of getting $1.50 from every book that I sell.
Okay, but let's unpack that, because I think you're seasoned. You've been doing this for a while.
Right.
A lot of people get the book out there, and then at some point after the book is out or after it's written and it's almost out, they're like, "Oh, let me think about some strategies for the book." I love putting it on the front end to say, "Wait a minute, I'm not writing this book for the dollar a book I get, because I'm not going to write a Harry Potter series that sells 10 million, but wow, if I wrote this book and I got 3 consulting clients, at X dollars per, and the lifetime value, whatever your business KPIs are, you go, yeah, that would be good, right? So understanding the business outcomes on the front end sounds like you spend a fair amount of time contemplating that.
Well, I did initially, but now it's automatic that when I decide to write a book, I picture my audience. So, for example, the merger mindset, it's going to be a narrow focus. It's not going to sell very many books, because the people who will buy it are the ones who are considering an M&A deal, either selling
Yep.
their companies or buying another
And
company.
that's
So,
okay, right? That's not going to be an
yeah,
airport book buy, or you're not competing with good to great, because you've narrowly defined your market. Therefore, there aren't 5 million people that care about that topic, and that's fine.
that's right. And if you think about it, if I just get one client who reads the book and calls me and says, "Would you help us? We are thinking about buying another company," or more often, we've already bought another company and it's not going the way we thought it was going to. So that, I can help them at any one of those. And these are very high price consulting projects. These start at $100,000. So if I go back to, I'm going to make $1 per book, or I'm going to get $100,000 when one person buys this book and calls me, or I send it to somebody and they say, we're thinking about a deal. Would you come talk to us and help us make up our mind? Then that's very lucrative. And it just positions me in the field, because then other people say, well, she wrote that book on mergers and acquisitions. I bet she's pretty good at strategy. And I'll often get a call for something completely not related to the books. But I think I say you have to appease the marketing gods in consulting, that you have to write these books and do these things. And then you get very pleasant surprises.
Okay, but let's move the variables a little bit. So in your world, an engagement is worth 6 figures. So you're in a low volume business. That's great, and you can be really, really targeted with a niche like M&A. As you move to other people are in other fields, leadership, management, communications, etc., much broader, they would have to figure out their metrics and say, oh, well, my average transaction might be a $10,000 speech or a $5,000 subscription to an online survey. Therefore, in order to make $1 million, I need to sell X of those. And again, it sounds like you're really disciplined on the front end to understand, to the point of it comes naturally, this is a good idea or this isn't. This is a good use of my energy. This isn't. This is a good ROI or not.
That's absolutely right, Peter. But the other thing is, when you're considering what you want to do and where you're going to go forward, I really encourage anyone listening who's thinking about doing a book is get a mentor. Get somebody that you can bounce your ideas off of, because otherwise you breathe your own exhaust. You think about your own thoughts and nobody says, well, wait a minute. Why are you, and I said this to another consultant, because part of my work is mentoring other consultants, and I say, you know, you are never going to be a bestseller with this in terms of making money.
Yep.
You might be on the bestseller list for a while, but even those who get on the bestseller lists don't usually end up making very much money, but
Yep.
you could make a lot more money in your consulting. So what would that look like?
So I love that. So the mentorship piece to me is very interesting because the art, the science of being an author, a thought leader, and a speaker are inherently solo team sports, right? Solo sports, right? However, you get smart people and you keep them sort of isolated, and maybe some are more introverted than others, and they don't have that interactions, and they go very, very, very far down a path that they probably wouldn't have if if they have a mentor that's been down a different, been down the path before and said, "Well, actually, I tried that. And here's what I found." And I've also found that other authors and thought leaders and such are actually quite generous with their time, and most of the successful ones are in multiple mentoring relationships.
Well, I also say you cannot be stingy with yourself.
Yep,
That I started my own business at the beginning of 2004, and since that time, I have averaged spending $20,000 a year on my professional development. Now, I know some people are cringing at that number, but I have to say that I have never spent that money and not gotten it back in multiples. So the first time I hired a mentor, my income increased 4 times the next year. So that was the most radical jump. But every year I do it, I get a slight bump. And at this point, at this stage in my career, a slight bump is pretty significant, but yet it's not gonna be like when you first do it. But I will never give up on having a mentor. In fact, I was just down in, Florida working with Lou Heckler, a very known speaker and coach, and I mean, I have a degree in speech. I know how to write a speech. I know how to coach speakers for conferences,
sure.
but I don't know how to mentor me, and Lou does.
So I love that, and I love that it goes to the growth mindset and the curiosity of you're willing to put your money and your time where your mouth is, and say, listen, I need to be developed. Some of the best folks I know in the business, it amazes me how much time and energy and dollars that they're spending on their own development. And then I take a look back and go, well, actually, that doesn't amaze me. That's how they stay on the top of their game, because
That's
it's
right.
easy to get complacent. And if you're there's nothing worse than seeing a speaker or consultant or whatever, and they're antiquated. They don't know, they don't have to be fluent, but they don't even know social media. They don't know how business is done today. They don't understand some of the tools that we use. And it's like, you have an obligation not only to yourself, first and foremost, but actually to your clients to stay at the top of your game.
Well, it's the only way to be successful for decade after decade, and I've been in this business a long time. But, it's the fall of the year, Peter, and we're starting to think about the playoffs in baseball and eventually the World Series. And I'm always amazed when I watch these games of the coaches studying those players, filming, reviewing the film with them. Now, these are players who are going to and will eventually win the World Series. They work with a coach every single day of their professional lives.
Yep.
Should we do less than that as consultants?
No, I agree. And the level of rigor and discipline and intensity they have it. They don't work with their coach every third Thursday in the afternoon because they happen to have a break for 2 hours.
Right.
It's a priority and it's a core part of their day. And they are doing it in a structured way that yields them an outcome that's worth the investment of their time and their dollars. So I agree with you. We should not hold ourselves to any standard less than
You should budget for your development the same way you budget for your mortgage.
that. I love it. So as we start to wrap up, Linda, any words of wisdom or advice either in the do camp or the don't camp to folks out there?
Yes, if you have not read Alan Weiss's book, Million Dollar Consulting, that has changed a lot of lives. And when people ask me about going into consulting, or transitioning from hourly fees to value-based fees. I think that's the first book you've got to read. That's sort of the Bible of consultants, and I think it's available in 50 different languages, a lot of languages anyway. So I would say buy that book. If you're not a consultant now, but you're thinking about becoming a consultant, save up 6 months of fixed expenses. If you don't do that, you will write cheap proposals, and,
Yep.
you don't wanna do that. Or if you're thinking about becoming a speaker, the same advice. Save up 6 months because it's probably going to take you 6 months of marketing to land that first speaking engagement or that consulting engagement, either one.
I love your comment there on it will prevent you from writing crappy proposals, right? Because
Right.
what happens is you say, oh, it's not a great month. I know I'm worth 50,000 for this engagement, but I really need the 30, so let me put that out there. That's a bad cycle to break because there's a negative compounding effect with that client and your brand in the marketplace, et cetera, when your pricing doesn't align with the value that you can create, which doesn't have to be connected to the current state of your checkbook.
Well, that's absolutely true, and when I talk about mindset, I always said and people will say to me, "Well, I'll get my foot in the door," and I said, "Then everybody there will think of you as having cheap feet. You do not want to
Yep.
get your foot in the door that way." But more importantly, Peter, it affects the way you think about yourself.
Yep.
So I tell beginners, either speak pro bono or get full fee. Do not
Yep.
reduce your fee in order to get in the door. If it's an association full of buyers, and I would gladly go speak at an association full of buyers in order to get my message in front of people who could hire me to do consulting work.
Well, but there's a weird line there. So I agree with that with some caveats, Linda, where there is a tendency, particularly in the speaker world, more so than consultants, to say, "Oh, come do this gig for the exposure," and there'll be so many great people in the room that lead to other things. And you wouldn't walk into another professional, go to your dentist, and say, "Let me do this cavity for the exposure because I anticipate having other cavities in the future." So I just think you need to be careful around vetting those situations to make sure that if you're making the investment of your time, which should be worth your full fee, you see a path to a return on that in a very real and concrete and tangible way.
Well, that's why I say a room full of buyers. So if I have
Right.
a room full of CEOs that can hire me for
Sure.
$100,000, getting a $10,000 fee for that is going to be a drop in the bucket compared to even one of
Sure.
those people calling me and hiring me. But if you make most of your fees in speaking, you probably can't take this approach. You probably have
Yep.
to be more selective about how often you do pro bono work.
Yep. Totally. Well, great. Well, this has been fantastic. I appreciate your candor and your sharing with us, and the fact that you're eating your proverbial dog food in terms of investing in yourself and living the growth mindset. So I love that. Thank you so much for being with us today, Linda.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
My pleasure. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.